Hello everyone, welcome to yet another edition of Women in Mobility brought to you by Mobility Outlook. With me today is Neelu Khatri, co-founder and head of operations at Akasa Air. Neelu, what a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to the show. Seriously, as the name suggests, Women in Mobility, what we present is largely intended to show stories of people like you, people who have carved out their own niche in the industry, in parts where they have had to compete, where they have had to take on massive headwinds. So perhaps we could start about yourself, your background, and how Neelu Khatri really dreamt of the skies and came into Akasa.
So it's a good question, and I do have a very unique background, I must say. So I'm not the regular corporate person. I grew up in a small town in Madhya Pradesh, Jabalpur, and nothing outstands for that place. It's a very sleepy Kant area with a beautiful Narmada river flowing. And back in those days when I was growing up in school and college, I think it was really important for me as an individual to think of what am I going to do next. With not many opportunities presented itself. So, and I was pretty lucky that while I was into my graduation years, I got this chance of applying for the Indian Air Force, and then became the first women batch of logistics officers way back in '93. And that changed the whole, outlook of coming from a small town. But I had a beautiful platform. Got trained at Hyderabad as an officer in the Indian Air Force in the supply chain branch, which is where I spent about 15 years of my life, and then came out of the Air Force as a wing commander rank. That was in 2008. I would say that at that point in time, for me it was very important to see the other side of the world, which is where I took a decision of coming out of the Indian Air Force. And at that point of time also because the Indian government hadn't made up their decision whether they wanted to keep women for permanent cadres, and which has now of course been implemented. And I was kind of lucky to get into a good platform like a KPMG consulting. Got to learn a lot, very different from what I was doing earlier in my life. Worked on the aerospace and aviation consulting field for 5 years. Went on to then become, Honeywell Aerospace president, which is where again the space of aviation and aerospace has been with me for quite some time. I handled a good amount of profit and loss, book, and I led the team. That is when I was serving all the airlines in India. And post my stint in Honeywell after 5 years, and that's how I got in touch with Vinay Dubey, who's our founder and a CEO. And he has this vision of, creating a beautiful airlines which is really global status airlines in India, and bring that kind of service and customer experience to Indian flyers. And I'm very lucky, very happy, very fortunate to be part of this team that's now kind of, aspiring to create a very different, I would say, product in India.
Amazing, but if I have to ask you, by your own admission, a small town girl, and you went on literally aiming for the sky. So did you typically encounter opposition? Here's a woman who should really honestly be studying and getting married, but here she's embarked on an all different path, which is typically perceived as a male bastion. So did you face opposition, or did you have enormous support?
So I would say words like opposition and male bastions are pretty strong in my views.
Okay.
I don't think I faced that kind of filmy, environment. But there was always a kind of a mind block that people do come in with, or they did come in my life as well, starting from my parents as well,
Right.
Why do you want to go join Ford, that's not an area which women should be in. But, somehow I was focused on what I wanted. I wouldn't say I was like a born leader or anything. I was not a very ambitious person in the beginning, but I knew what I don't want to do, So I don't want to be, sitting at home doing nothing. Even if I was a person sitting at home, I would have created something of my own, So that's something I knew. So I think that helped bring clarity to myself, and then translating that with various people who are around you. I think somehow I have always found support with men I have worked with, whether it was in the Indian Air Force, because that was probably the toughest time of our life, wherein people didn't know how to handle women, even when they were part of that, because there was a government verdict that came, induct women. But were the workforce ready for it? The answer was a big no. They didn't know how to handle us. They didn't know where to place us in work. They didn't know how women would work after working hours, or how they would, go on temporary duties, and what were the arrangement. There were no washrooms for women. There were no separate bedrooms, because when 4 people were sent on temporary duties, they would be put in one room. And now there were 4 men and 1 woman. They don't know another room for them. So I've had an incident wherein we were sent to Agra for some work, and they were saying, oh, remove her name because we don't have another room for her. For men, they can club them in a room. So I had to walk up to, a place wherein I could get that little curtain or something to create my own space, to say, hey guys, I'm comfortable here, you guys sleep on the other side.
Right.
So those things have been there, but I think they've been all good fun, very good learning experiences, and very good bonding that we created with some of the people that I've worked with.
But how did you cope, Neelu? I mean, initially it must have been quite traumatic, working with people who were used to, an all boys club, in a manner of speaking, and was it difficult?
So again, as I say, I somehow do not relate with the words traumatic and difficult. It was awkward to describe it in the best way.
Right.
As I said, men didn't know how to handle women. There were no policies that were framed as they are now. So there was always that awkwardness. There were always people who would say, if you were posted to a certain place, they would say, oh, I don't want a woman officer, give me a male officer. Not because they are opposed to you, just because they find it easier to deal with them, and there were not enough clarity. So, but again, as I say, it's life. For me, life has been a huge learning part, and I think I'm very lucky, so to say, like, from the generation that I come in, to have, come into this path of growth, whatever little growth I've seen in my life. Because I, probably few years back, without a STEM education, without any very good doctor or an engineer qualification, I reached where I reached. Because those days it was always not engineer ban jao ya doctor ban jao, and I was neither. So I relate to my journey with a lot of happiness and contentment, and I have many people to thank for.
That's good to know. Do you believe that, in a sense, that your tenure there softened the men a bit? Did they perhaps learn to get along with women better?
Hugely, I must say, hugely. I mean, working with the troops that were on the borders, and not getting into an aggressive language while dealing with them, understanding their emotional status, their family status. I think women brought in a whole new aspect to the Indian Defence Forces when they were there. So it was definitely a very different and a very welcoming environment most of the times.
Could you perhaps elaborate on that? When you say women brought in an all-new dimension, what exactly?
So we could, at least I could interact with the soldiers on a very different level than how my male senior colleagues, could handle. So they were more, defense is more about giving orders,
Right.
And you give the orders and expect that to come back. And people do have that kind of discipline to follow those. I think with women coming in, we started looking at the circumstances in which, or an empathy, a feeling of an empathy with the soldiers on why they couldn't do certain things that they couldn't do. And what is the family circumstances? Oh, he has a kid that was born and he hasn't seen that kid for 8 months. Imagine a mental vulnerability of the person you were giving that order to. So I think those things were definitely standing out. Even our senior most officers would talk about, let women go in for those counseling sessions. The lady officers were put in as, such duties and such. I think that was a good experience for me.
So in the process, it created a tremendous sense of bonding, you think?
Yes. I mean, some of the soldiers that I have worked with way back in Ladakh in '99 during Kargil times are still, some of my best colleagues or friends, or, they drop in without asking us at, where you are, and those are the best bonds that you form in adversities.
During this tenure, are there any particular incidents that you would like to highlight? A narrative or two where just a sense of fulfillment, a sense of satisfaction that you truly were in the place that you belong to?
So a very interesting incident was, when we were in the region of Ladakh, and at a high altitude situations, as soldiers you get some specific food to eat. Right. Ration, you get it, right? So in that, part of the ration was getting those dark chocolates, Amul, and then some nuts and raisins, because they're supposed to give you a bit of extra protein or extra energy to survive in those sub-zero temperatures. And the amount of quantity that you get is not something that you can consume in a day. So we would kind of, get it together and take it home for families, etc. when we went on holidays. So on that scenario, one of the times I was visiting a bunker on the Pakistan border. And when I go in the bunker, these bunkers are, you have a wall here, and under the ground you have a little room wherein they stay, and on the walls are those guns and binoculars and, whatever kind of weapons they are authorized for. And I see that, Ladakh is a desert with white or brown sand, and this bunker is made out of blackish brown kind of a wall. Right. And I'm like, what kind of a cement is this? And I realized that those soldiers were sticking the dark Amul chocolate on the bunker, and it protected, it gave them an additional layer of, strength, so that when you fired a bullet, it wouldn't cross the bunker wall. So there's so many of those experiences that I've had is, they just, when you look back and think about it, you smile and, be thankful to God that you had those kind of experiences.
But that's quite amazing.
It is.
Chocolates actually doubled up as...
on the wall.
Wow. Do you believe that in a way, you were the pioneers, the women who really, in a sense, led the way forward? Do you think in a way attitudes have changed with more and more women coming into the Air Force?
Absolutely.
What's it like right now when you speak to people? Is there a greater sense of people being less patronizing, more with it?
I think there's at least I see that they've been now included in the workforce. They are now literally in every department. For example, initially when we came in, there were no pilots. They started with helicopter pilots, they started with transport pilots, and way back, few years back now, we have the fighter jet being flown by girls. Same thing happened with the Army, Navy. They were not sent on ships earlier, now they are. So, and the policies have been drafted, created, whether it's maternity leave or, some co-postings with your family. So if your husband is a person also, then how do they live their family lives too with children? It's a different world, and I think we're living in a pretty good world. I feel pretty proud of being part of that culture.
Do you still think it's work in progress? Have attitudes changed completely from the viewpoint of men, or do you still think there's still a long way to go?
But I don't think it's for men. You can't say that this is something long way to go. I think it's for all of us in every organization that needs to be a work in progress in the kind of world that we live in, So inclusion doesn't mean just women inclusion. It means race inclusion. It means capability inclusion. It means gender inclusion, so many other things, just our mindsets that we come in. So I don't think it's over, It's not going to ever get over for anybody. But at least as a world, we've started dialoguing on that. We're not scared of talking about it. We're starting to address those issues. So, at Akasa, we're doing it all the time. Just by the way that our organization is structured, if I were to say, let's have 50% women, we have, by nature of the job, we have cabin crew who are women, many of them. Our cabin crew policy is that we invite both men and women. Capability is more important than anything. But by that standards, we would have 50% women if you took the whole organization. But that's where I think Vinay Dubey, who's our CEO, and us, we had this discussion very openly, and I said, no, we're going to track this constantly, department by department. So it's not just the crew, but it will be the airport staff, it will be the engineering staff, it will be the commercial, operations, HR, legal, and we are literally tracking, and the ideal scenario that we want to do it is 50% in every department.
Do you think it makes a difference? Because there's also a counter argument saying that women who say we don't want to be treated with kid gloves, we are capable of holding our own. And you, in a way, believe that one should walk the talk on gender diversity? Is it absolutely paramount in your view?
Good question. And, the answer would be that it's always good to have diverse workforce for better performance. That's a no-brainer, right?
Yes.
Today when you speak, you see the private equity companies saying that we will not invest into companies that do not have enough diverse board members, for example. And diverse doesn't mean just men and women, it means a lot of stuff. So the answer to that is definitely yes. I think on a personal note, I always go for diversity and capability. So it doesn't mean that you're saying diversity and you pick up people who are not capable, and that's unfair. So you have to work towards drawing a fine balance. At the same time, can an organization handhold to upgrade the capabilities of people? What are we doing in terms of training, in terms of giving experiences, or whatever steps you can take that. So it has to be a very fine balance between that.
When you and Vinay created this template, which I call a dynamic one, it's still happening. Did you have to also go the extra mile in sensitizing men to this ecosystem? Did they need greater hand-holding, understanding? Did you believe that there's a need for greater EQ?
So, it's not just me and Vinay, it's a full leadership team that we have in Akasa. Right. And important thing is that we as leaders at Akasa talk about it. What are the requirements, And we've been very, very candid about it. We speak fearlessly within our boardrooms. We put our ideas there and we debate over all the pros and cons. And that gives in itself a very good environment where we can, create policies and come out with decisions that then get into implementations. I'm very happy about that.
What's your own experience been with women pilots? I remember a little over a year or even a couple of years back, there were cases where a man apparently protested. He wanted to get off an airline because the pilot was a woman. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I remember reading this sometime. And do you believe that in a way women what would you believe that women bring to the table, even in areas like piloting an aircraft, for instance?
That's interesting. So for some reason, India is one of the countries that has produced the maximum amount of women pilots in commercial aircrafts. I don't remember the numbers now, but I remember having this debate in one of the forum at Ministry of Civil Aviation, wherein this had come out, certain percentage, which was much better than anywhere in the world. So it just means that something is going right for women in India, that first they are interested, their families are encouraging them. And remember, becoming a pilot is not a cheap affair. The families have to put in a lot of investments to give that kind of capabilities and licensing for women. So for some reason, I think it's really good to see, India has a lot of women pilots. And on the performance, it's all about training. whether person A and person B, man or woman, they get the same kind of training, they get the same kind of experience, they get the same kind of certification, and there is no reason why one or the other will perform good or bad because of similar. So they do get an equal platform to do, and I've seen my friends around a lot of pilots, and I'm extremely proud of the way they operate.
I'm also curious, is it given, just for me to understand better, that when it comes to stewards versus stewardesses, is it perhaps a fact that women are preferred to men when it comes to this function?
So at Akasa, we do not believe that.
Good.
So we have a very open culture wherein both men and women are encouraged. More important is, do you stand up to the policies and to the values that Akasa wants to stand for, which is, are you being warm to the clients, are you, serving the needs, are you giving a good customer experience, and we have both men and women.
Right. What is Neelu Khatri like beyond your, of course, marinated in the airlines industry, but what's she like beyond work? I mean, what are your interests, and what are the things you like to do typically?
Okay, so a lot of things actually. It changes from season to season, time to time, depending upon what kind of time frame I have in my hand. So I could start with baking a cake at home, or going for a cycle ride, or weekends I sometimes go for bike rides as well, maybe 200 or 300 kilometers in 2 days. I love hiking and mountaineering. Wow. So I do that at least once in 2-3 months if I can. Time is always short in hand, so that's something which is, I have to deal specifically when you're working for an organization which is growing at such a lightning speed. I like making friends, I like learning new languages, and my way of learning languages is very different. So what I do is I pick up a Korean serial or something like that, and I start watching and I start picking up a lot of basic words. So a lot of those things that I can think of doing. Reading is another good passion. I do like reading a lot of books.
And before we sign off, driving also, buses you said?
Anything that moves. I like, so whether it's a bike or a tractor or a bus, my dream is to become a bus driver after I retire. Maybe fetch kids from one school, to home or something like that. I've seen, one point of time in my life I saw a bus driver picking up school kids, and I just got talking to him. This was in Washington DC way back, I think 20 years back. And he just impressed me. He was an old man, must be about 70 or something, and I thought he was a school bus driver and he then told me that he was, a CEO of some company, retired, and he loves driving, and it just got into my head. I said, this is what I want to do after I retire.
Neelu Khatri, I really hope your dreams are fulfilled.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time. It was indeed a pleasure talking to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.